Welcome to Equine. Welcome to the 2018 Senior Seminar. We got a bunch of fantastic papers and research to present to you all, and I'm really looking forward to it. As always, we want to acknowledge that we're on Dakota people's homeland, and here at the University of Minnesota, we try to remind them of that as often as possible. Kind of the plan for the day, real quick, is we've got 3 separate panels. Each paper is about 10 minutes. They're going to do each paper in order, and then at the end, there should be 10, 15 minutes left for questions. So the first 3 presenters are Summer, Sequoia, and Angela. They'll go in that order, and then we'll just ask that you hold your questions and applause until the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Summer. And I'll let them all introduce themselves.
Hamarakiapi, Iushkiawanchia kapi, Chade washe napechu zapie. Oyatemi tawaki sisito wakpetu wichakiapie. Hawi tankaku akichi tawa chingwi makiapi kai shwashichu ya summer makiapie. So hello everybody, it's great to see you all. I shake all of your hands with a good heart. My name is Summer, and I am from the Sisseton Sioux tribe, which is located in Sisseton, South Dakota on the Lake Traverse Reservation. So today I am presenting my project, which is called Shunko Wakanoyate, the Horse Nation Story of Healing. So to start this off, I'd like to start with this quote. This horse has the 6 directions that we use in our ceremonies. The 2 front legs represent the west and the north. The 2 back legs represent the east and the south. The head points up, the ears point up, represents Wakantakya, up above. The tail points downwards towards Mother Earth. When you put those 6 directions together, it creates a sacred center to bring Wowoka in. It's a sacredness you can only have with these 6 directions. This is from Mikey Peters, who's from the Sisseton Sioux tribe. To start off with a little bit of background, I'd like to talk about horses and their relationship to North America. So horses are actually indigenous to North America. They started off with this horse called the Dawn horse, which not many people know about. It was just about yay big. It was kind of about the size of a fox. It would like climb into trees. It's a really odd creature. But like it started here in North America, and then it spread out to the rest of the world, where it then evolved. For whatever reason, it went extinct here, and then as you probably know, the Spanish brought the current horse back over to North America, where it spread throughout again. With that horse, they formed a close relationship with a lot of Plains tribe. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. And so with that horse, we had a kinship. We had this reciprocal relationship. A horse regalia is kind of an example I had of how closely we had this relationship with the horse. We would gift them horse regalia as a sign of, how much we gave thanks for them. With that being said, with colonization, we had this thing called the horse genocide that not a lot of people know about. And so what the United States would do is actually they would line up the Oceti-Sakowin's horses, and they would shoot them systematically because they knew we had such a close relationship with them. They were what helped us spread out through amongst the Great Plains, that by killing them, they were helping to take us down pretty much. But then with that, we also had our cultural genocide, as I'm sure a lot of us know of. We have our historical trauma. We have boarding schools, the Dakota 38, which happened here in Minnesota, the Great Sioux Wars, et cetera, and these all lead to public health disparities. And so just to kind of showcase the relationship, this is kind of like back then, 1905. And this actually just happened at Standing Rock, just to show you guys like how our relationship is still here throughout time. This is actually my Dekshi, my uncle right here on the left. So that's kind of like my own personal relationship with horses. So why this project? Like, why am I talking to you guys about horses? I mean, I like horses. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that. But like for myself, horses have made an impact on how I act. Like I used to be really shy and quiet. After working with horses, I've definitely come out of my shell a little bit more. So my attitude has changed since working with horses. But for this project specifically, you hear a lot of people talk about language revitalization and ceremonies and how we're trying to bring all those back to our native people. But what you don't hear about are the animal kinship, our animal relationships. And so that's something I wanted to focus on and something I was curious about. So what about our animal kinships? Like how can they help us in these revitalization processes? So my thesis, it's a lot of information there. You're more than welcome to read it. But what I want to focus on is the bolded section. If we are to heal our community fully, there must be adequate Shunko Wakan cultural revitalization. That is the main point of my project. That is what I'm trying to tell all of you guys about. So to start off with public health in indigenous communities, what does that mean? What even is public health? So the American Public Health Association says that public health is promoting and protecting the health of people and communities where they live, learn, work, and play. It's promoting wellness by encouraging healthy behaviors, and it's looking at the root of why there are certain health disparities prevalent in certain communities. So if we're talking about Native communities specifically, we can talk about the suicide rates that are 2 to 3 times the national average. Pioneer alone, I think, is like 200% higher than the national average. Substance abuse, we have drug abuse, alcohol abuse. These are all prevalent in our communities. There's lower life expectancies. I think on my reservation, the life expectancy is about 50 years old, which is pretty low compared to the national. So where does this come from? A deep embedded genetic depression. See, our people at one time, the Dakota people, had a very strong connection with the Creator, a very strong connection with Mother Earth, a very strong connection with nature, the forces of nature, all living things on this planet. And all this was taken away from us like that. And we lost this connection with everything that we had. That's where this depression comes from. This depression is just now clinically diagnosed as the same thing soldiers suffer from when they return from combat. Peter Lengeek is a member of the Crow Creek Sioux tribe, and he's a domestic violence and sexual abuse prevention specialist. He was on the Dakota 38 ride, which, if you don't know, is a yearly memorial ride for the Dakota 38 plus 2 that were hanged in the largest hanging mass execution in the United States, and that happened right here in Minnesota. And so he knows a lot about horses, so he talks a lot about the relationship with the horse and this depression. So what I want to talk about, though, is the solution. Like, what can we do? So like I said earlier, we talk about language revitalization, ceremonies, and how those can help our Native youth who are at most at risk. I want to put more emphasis on equine therapy with a cultural focus. And so equine therapy is a Western medicine concept. It's a relatively new field. Equine therapy can be working with like physical disabilities, so sometimes there's riding involved, or it might just be mental, emotional. It's used with drug abuse, it's used with drug abuse survivors, sexual abuse survivors, all of that. And then also with our horse relationships, it's an old concept, something the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation, has known for hundreds and hundreds of years. So again, like, why horses? Just to kind of give you a little bit more background on equine therapy. Horses are naturally large and intimidating. I'm not sure how many of you have ever been around horses, but I'm sure that some of you would be quite intimidated going up to a horse. And so it pushes people out of their comfort zone, you know, large creature, all of a sudden you're being told you have to approach it, you have to ride it, you have to work with it. How many people want to do that, quite frankly? They're intimidating, so it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And they're reactors to your emotions. So they are, a lot of times they're talked about as being mirrors. So if you come up to a horse and you're angry, you're feeling angry for whatever reason, but maybe you're denying it, that horse is going to tell you you're angry. It's going to look at you, it might rear back, it might shake its head a lot. It's going to make you uncomfortable, and it's going to cause you to self-reflect and be like, what am I doing? Like, am I really that angry? Is that the reason why this horse is acting this way? So they're reactors to your emotions, they're a mirror. So a big part of my project, though, is focusing on the stories and teachings that my elders, that my mentors have taught me regarding horses. And I did this because I wanted to acknowledge these as legitimate forms of knowledge. Because they are. A lot of indigenous knowledge that we know is legitimate knowledge that Western medicine later comes to prove. And so here, I want to talk about how horses are thunder beings. They come from the West in the Oceti-Sakowin Nation. Thunder is sacred, and it's part of our sacred directions. They also carry our relatives to the spirit plane. You hear that a lot. And then there's ituch, which is reciprocity. So you take care of the horse, and the horse will take care of you. And they are also part of the Wamakashkan. Janice Badmaukason said that the Wamakashkan are the four-legged that still have the same consciousness as Wakantanka. Wakantanka is the great creator, is the great spirit, the great mystery, the creator. And she also mentions that they have horse medicine, and so that horse medicine is what I talked about earlier. That whole mirror to the consciousness is what it's called. With that being said, I'd like to say thank you to John Eagle Sr., Mikey Peters, and Janice Badmaukason for their stories. So again, I'd like to combine both. So culturally relevant horse therapy. Lisa Fulton is somebody who works down in Prior Lake. Janice Badmaukason also works down in Prior Lake. John Eagle Sr. and Donnie Medicine Horse and his horse group, Shungwa Togada, they all work out in Standing Rock and Crow Creek Sioux Reservation. And so all of the stuff that they're doing is equine therapy. It's working with their communities. It's working with youth. It's working with at-risk people to heal them, heal their spirits. and St. Iglesias University, which is on the Rosebud Reservation, they actually have a counseling program that involves equine therapy and cultural competence within that program. So they don't refer to their clients as clients, they refer to them as their relatives. They're not just a patient, that's their toshka, their niece, or their toshka, their nephew, their tojan, their niece. And they do a lot of work with equine therapy and getting kids to work with the horses. And so I believe that we should involve these in other public health programs such as suicide prevention and substance abuse prevention. Even in the inner cities where it's harder to work to bring a horse to the inner city kid, you can still bring the kid out to like Prior Lake, for example. That's an accessible area. So I really feel that we should be combining these two. I think it's a very important aspect. So to finish this off, here's another quote from Mikey Peters to kind of, as a continuation of the first quote. With that wowokan inside those 6 directions, you place a man or a woman on a horse. You give it that 7th direction, which is the chokata, the center of all things. It represents mitakias. Everything is related and balanced. And you put that all together and you move forward. And then I'd just like to end it with this. I think this kind of, I don't know, her smile, guys, like, I think that says a lot. A lot of kids are kind of scared, but she, like, hopped right up on that horse, and she didn't want to get off. She actually started crying when we tried to pull her off. But, like, she did not want to get off, and I think that smile says a lot about the healing nature of horses. So, yeah, so pida mayayapi, hinana pekte, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
I know. I think it's gonna be like really, yeah, probably. Summer, can you? No. They're in order. It's okay. Thank you.
Anin Nadinawe Maganak, Sequoia Indigenikas, Guababa Kinagag and Dunjaba. Hello, my relatives. My name is Sequoia Hawk. I'm a descendant of the White Earth Nation, as well as from the Hoopa Valley tribe in what is now Northern California. And today I will be talking about the convergence of Indigenous feminisms and Indigenous futurisms. And I need this thing. So what is Indigenous futurism? Who in this room has heard of Indigenous futurism? Nice! So just a little background for people who don't know. So Indigenous futurism is really storytelling about the past, the present, and the future through Indigenous perspectives. It's reimagining reality through dystopian or utopian views, pushing back on the ideals of colonialism. So a really great example of Indigenous futurism, or just futurism in general actually, is the major motion picture Black Panther. So this is a great example of futurism because it talks about technology, culture, sovereignty, with a modern sense in scientific notions. So Grace Dillon was the first to coin this term, Indigenous futurism, in the early 2000s. And since then, many artists have followed suit. So Elizabeth LaPence, who is a designer, a writer, an artist in games and comics, talks about Indigenous futurism as this. It recognizes space-time as simultaneously past, present, and future, and therefore futurism is much about the future as it is about right now. And so another artist, Rebecca Roanhorse, who is an author, talks about Indigenous futurism, that it advocates for the sovereign. It dares to let Indigenous creators define themselves and their world, not just as speaking back to colonialism, but as existing in their own right. That is not to say that the past is ignored, but rather it is folded into the present, which is folded into the future. So here are some more examples of Indigenous futurists. Darcy Little Badger, who is a Lipan Apache writer and scientist, a tribe called Red, which is a group of Native musicians, and Tonka Watiti, who is a film director, actor, screenwriter. So as you can see, Indigenous futurism comes in a lot of different forms. So now, what is Indigenous feminism? So I see feminism as the fight for women's rights. So Indigenous feminism would be the fight for cultural Indigenous rights. Their fight is centered around sovereignty for Indigenous people. the ability to have self-determination. Sovereignty towards land and sovereignty for their bodies. And for Indigenous women, sovereignty of their bodies includes cultural birthing practices and reproductive rights being held in the same esteem as Western medicine. This also includes highlighting all cultural traditions of Indigenous people, including such things as food sovereignty. So just being able to present themselves authentically as who they are and represent themselves is the goal of this Indigenous feminism. So in an interview with BBC Indigenous, which is a broadcast in Canada, 3 Native women got together to talk about the future of Indigenous feminism. So the woman in yellow, Tasha Spillett, stated that Indigenous feminism is an affirmation that Indigenous women have always an inherent sovereignty over our bodies, over our spirits, and land bases. And then the woman in blue in the middle, Karen Recollet, stated that, for me, Indigenous feminism has always and will always maintain integrity towards the love of Indigenous lives and land. So as you can see, Indigenous feminism is really focused on community as a whole, what we can do to better everyone. It has that we mentality of thinking, which includes the people, the land, and everything that inhabits it. So now for the convergence. How did these two things collide? So I got introduced to Indigenous Futurism a little while ago, and I started looking into it, and I was noticing that Native women were at the forefront of this movement. And that got me really interested in, like, why is that? So I started digging a little deeper, and I was reading feminist articles and futurist articles, and noticing that they were saying a lot of the same things. So in one article, The Place Where We All Live and Work Together by Leanne Batakmasak Simpson, and this is a gender analysis of sovereignty, so it's a very feminist article. She asked an elder what the word for sovereignty or self-determination is in Anishinaabe-Moan in the Anishinaabe language. And she said it was Kina Gitchi Anishinaabe Ogaming. And that really, being able to hear it in the language and see it the first time gave me a new understanding of it. And also in this article, she talks about how sovereignty is not just about the land, it's also about the connection with our generations, the past 7 generations and our future 7 generations. And so I was like, those are such futuristic ideals. So this is a great example of an article that talks about both. And I was thinking about how Native women, why Native women are at the forefront of this movement. And I was thinking, well, of course, Native women are at the forefront. They're the ones who are the life bringers, the ones who think about our future generations. So they're, of course, the ones who are writing about this. Which brings me to my creative project. So we get to do a creative project instead of doing a full paper sometimes for this class. So for my creative project, I want to give a little background. So there is a Twin Cities Horror Fest that goes on every year. And last year I attended, and I was sitting in the theater, and I was noticing that there was no Native representation. So that got me thinking, well, what would a Native horror story look like? That's my creative project. I'm writing a Native horror story. So my background, ergo. My background is in theater. I'm a performing artist and now a writer. And so I started thinking, what does a Native horror story look like? And I started exploring the concepts of, well, how Native people were seen as savages, as heathens, as monsters, of people of nightmares, and how I could put that in a play and how Native identities could relate to those terms in a certain way in this reality. So I'd be using a heightened reality to talk about these terms. And then I was also interested in exploring the Anishinaabe word Anakobijigan. So you can use that word to talk about an ancestor, but you can also use that word to talk about your great-grandmother or great-grandfather. It's genderless. So it'd be great-grandmother and a great-granddaughter would be Anakobijigans. But because I would be a great-granddaughter of my great-grandmother, I would also be an Anakobijigan. So I was really interested in talking about 3 Anakobijigans, the past, the present, and the potential future, all coming together to be able to talk about anything that has to do with Native women, being able to be on stage, talking about their stories, be authentically themselves on stage, is something that I'm interested with this play. So to end my presentation, I want to read a little snippet of my play for you all. When I was little, my favorite thing to do was the monkey bars. I would go around and around in a circle over and over and over again until my hands blistered and bled. And I wouldn't stop. I would look down at my hands, rugged and raw, and I would see what I had accomplished, myself. I'd wrap my hands up and move on, knowing underneath there were wounds. And after they healed, I would do it all again, knowing this time I was stronger. This time I could withstand longer, be faster, around and around and around. People would notice me, and I would feel proud. And again, when I was done, my hands were rugged and raw, but not like before. They were stronger, and they kept getting stronger until the blisters stopped and the blood stopped. I was protected. My body, my hands had protected themselves from the harsh, cold metal. Hanging there, always going forward, I knew nothing could stop me. And I know that now. I know that nothing can stop me. And that ends my presentation. Thank you, Chini Glitch.
Hamarakepi, Shantea Washtea Nafi Chizapi, Angela Richards Makiapi. Lakota artist Hemacha. So welcome everyone. I shake your hands with a good heart today. My name is Angela Richards. I'm a senior here. I'll be graduating after the senior capstone project. Today, my project is Breaking Colonial Paradigms Within Contemporary Indigenous Art, a personal coming to know journey. This ties in with our theme of transformative power in Indigenous story and art. Now, contemporary Indigenous artists such as myself are breaking colonial paradigms and engaging with the healing aspect of art. Today, we focus on healing from trauma resulted from the ongoing colonization of America. I focused on Oscar Hell and Andrea Carlson as agents of change in the deconstruction of the colonial gaze. Hell challenged the constraints of what constituted the canon of contemporary Native American art. Carlson challenges the colonial institutional narratives in regards to Indigenous histories. Lucy Lippert argued, in like manner to the land, Native American art has been colonized as well. Kevin Slivka supports Lippert's argument, bringing forth proof of forced assimilation efforts present in the art curriculum of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879. Indigenous expression was reduced to still life. The Indian boarding school era has left lasting negative impacts of trauma being passed down intergenerationally, trauma going undiagnosed, and trauma unresolved. In 1958, a major paradigm shift occurred within contemporary Native American art. Howe was rejected due to breaking the colonial paradigm of traditional Indian painting, which was restricted to flat design, solid coloring, and depictions of traditional ways of life. Howe persisted in critiquing and dismantling the art institution as a whole. Howe brought the Dakota stories to life with bold color and dynamic movement. Influenced by his culture and the lines of the spiderweb, Howe paved the way for artists such as myself today to be able to express myself outside of the aforementioned colonial paradigms. Robert Silberman said, "This art represents a complex form of expression, encompassing a multiplicity of tribal identities and artistic approaches." This was in reference to contemporary Indigenous art. Andrea Carlson, with Indigenous precision, recontextualizes colonial institutional narratives in regards to Indigenous histories with complex notions born from the juxtaposition of rich cultural imagery. Carlson is not a surrealist. She is an Indigenous realist. Her art is the duality that the Indigenous individual lives in, these two worlds. The world or reality that is the endearing of a neo-colonial relationship with the settler nation of the U.S. What may seem surreal to a person may actually be the reality of another. The westernized standard of beauty does not apply to contemporary Indigenous art. contemporary Indigenous art is about the transformation power in Indigenous story through art. I found that land, history, and culture permeate throughout contemporary Indigenous art. We as contemporary Indigenous artists are creating a neo-reservation narrative and choosing art as our cultural tool and weapon. Jolene Ricard stuck me with these 3 questions. Due to the issues of Indigenous space and the lack of Indigenous art history discourse, I like to focus on the bottom bullet point, is Native art beyond the West? Yes, Indigenous art is indeed and beyond the West. That is why the continuation of Indigenous space, such as the All My Relations Art Gallery here in Minneapolis, is important in the establishment of Indigenous art history discourse. As for the creative portion of the project, I asked what sets myself apart. I consider art to be a healing ceremony or akin to a healing ceremony. Leroy Myers argues that art and religion satisfy the same human need, and that is expression. I exercise spiritual autonomy, shift from political to cultural, spiritual, and intellectual sovereignty. Art is medicine, and we can heal through art. This is my painting, the Wanahi Chanku. It's cut off. It means the spirit world, the spirit road, and this is within Lakota Star knowledge and cosmology. And I did this painting for my father, my brother, and the ones that have passed on that cannot be here with me today. So with that, thank you very much. So nervous.
Hey, Rich, any questions to ask? I hope there's some questions or comments. Comments are always good. You can stand.
Sit.
Sure, he's kind of got you. Comments? Everybody's nervous.
This question is for Summer. I'm just kind of curious, what do you think are some of the next steps that could be taken to get the equine therapy rolling?
So personally, I think a lot of it is lack of funding, and I mean, as far like lack of awareness too for equine therapy. So I think if people were to spend more time funding those equine therapists that are currently out there, like those ones that are culturally relevant, I think that you could do a lot of work with Native youth for specifically. So actually here at the University of Minnesota, I'll give her a little shout out. Her name is Mercedes Van Cleve, and she's a junior, and she actually has a business right now in Prior Lake in Shakopee with equine therapy. And the American Indian Student Cultural Center was able to go and be a part of that, and so that was a really cool experience for us, I think, and we were able to see how it worked, like, personally. And then I've also been able to work with student groups like Anda Young, for example, and we went down to Lower Sioux, and we were able to introduce some of the kids to horses too there, and just seeing like their attitudes change through that way. So I think by getting the funding and just bringing about that awareness that this is an option for these kids, like, because a lot of people think like just because you're in the cities you don't have that option, but you do. Like, you really do have that option. So to bring about that awareness, I think would help kickstart that process, because you're seeing it come about a lot more now. Like, it didn't used to be a thing, but equine therapy is now becoming a pretty big thing now.
I think it'll work a little bit better if you all stand up to respond.
Oh, stand, okay. Yeah, thank you. I'll sit back down.
So, other questions or commentary? Words of support? Here, I got it. Oh. Give me the microphone.
Hello. Oh, it's not real. Okay. This is Sequoia, right? Yeah. When do you plan on performing your piece? And how, I'm curious how, because the monkey bars didn't seem very like scary or horror-like. How do you plan to incorporate that a little bit?
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. So I have to stand. I'm standing. So I was going to perform it actually in February, but I'm studying abroad in New Zealand next semester, so it'll probably be sometime in the summer, summer of 2019. And then to follow up for about the horrorism is that there was the Horror Fester that happened this October. And so I've been thinking about having the play be a lot of recollection, like a story, a collective of Indigenous women's stories that were related around horror in a sense, so things that happened to them or experiences or things that just sort of felt that fit to them. So I really wanted it to be like a collective narrative of stories. Something that I wrote was a little bit more inspired by just my own story of myself and other things, but I'm really thinking of incorporating the horror aspect and the overarching theme of it, sort of like with the design aspects of it, but also in the idea of how we combat of it. So I don't want it to be a story of like sadness and sorrow, and that's like the narrative that I'm bringing out. I want it to be able to be like there's still a future, and we have something to look forward to, and not dwell sort of on this like sad part of it, and sort of make it a satire almost of that people think that Native peoples are monsters or people of nightmares. Like that's not a true thing. We're just humans trying to live our lives, and so being able to like combat that narrative is also something. So it's like going to be scary, but also going to be like that's not true. What are you talking about? In a, like a satirical way. Thanks.
Okay, my question is also for Sequoia, so you can stay standing. So kind of speaking off of the last question, I know in class we talked a lot about how you're going to incorporate aspects of blood and blood quantum into the idea of horror. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I was really interested in talking, so like a lot of horror stories and normal things like talk about, you know, they have blood, they have flake blood, that's like a horror thing. So thinking about like blood quantum, as Elise said, and blood memory, an ancestral memory, and how that all can sort of be tied together in this theme of like horror. So it's, like I said, it's like going to be kind of spooky and kind of scary, but also talk about themes that are relevant to Indigenous people, such as, you know, blood quantum and blood memory and things that are sort of like historical trauma in that sense. So I was thinking about other things such as that were related to the trauma that we've experienced in the past. And so that sort of also goes in with the past, the present, and the potential future. So talking about how blood quantum could affect the potential future, how that, you know, certain tribes could die out because of the blood quantum, or certain things like that. So there's a lot of aspects that aren't just kind of spooky horror, but also things that are related to Indigenous peoples. So thanks, Elise. Oh, thank you. I forgot.
Should I raise my hand? I have two microphones.
So, any other questions, comments? I'm going to ask Angela if she'd comment a little bit more about, you said ritual and ceremony as part of your art practice. Would you care to tell people what you mean by that?
Yeah, so ritual and ceremony. I thought about art has always been therapeutic for me. There is a thing called art therapy, so that's interesting too. As for ritual protocol, I don't just paint at any time or any day. Something has to have occurred in my life, or I had to have had a dream or a vision of something that has drawn me to doing this thing. I have to be in a good mindset. It is my space, it is my time, so I tend to want to have a lot of like space and not have anybody bother me. There is a lot of smudging, there's a lot of praying. Leroy Meyer, he actually, I guess we could say, coined a term, la codification. You adopt something and you make it your own. So going along with my culture as well, in Western terms, animism. My canvases, you know, they're not just canvases to me, they are alive to me. My brushes, my colors, everything is alive to me, and in a sense, it is an extension of my being, my energy, my personality. So it's a little bit of that.
Would you care to comment on that painting and its relation to those ideas?
Yeah, I would have loved to bring it today. I dropped it on the floor yesterday. So this is just a picture. I was just wanting to see how it looked in photos. I actually have some pretty nice brushwork in the background. You can't see it in the picture, but it's kind of outlining in a way the organization of chaos in our universe. Wanari Chanku is Lakota word for spirit road. We believe in that being the Milky Way that we know of today. This painting is very meaningful. Even if I dropped it, I'm sure I could fix it. Bob Ross, there's no mistakes, just happy accidents, right? But the colors all came to me. It's always been the same dream since I've had a loved one pass on. I immediately look to the Milky Way. It's a peace of mind for me. It's comfort for me. So this was important for my father and my brother.